in a car. Oh, I said, some guy come down from Oregon, said he's got some kind of a dream, and I told him I wouldn't give him no false hope. It's 300 here waiting now. And I told him, just write the dream out. Said, I got a pile of them in here that high anyhow, and I just added to it. I said, bring him in. Give him 5 minutes. Well, as soon as the man walked in, 5 minutes, he said, I'm Reverend Walker. I think his name was, from Oregon. I think he's some other denomination. I don't know, Presbyterian, something. He said, I met you about 20 years ago. I come down to Grants Pass for you, not Grants Pass, but I forget the name of the place. There said, whole country headlines in the paper every morning. Said everybody knew about it. Said, I couldn't even get to the building where he's at, but I seen you go up one day on the street. I walked up, said 4 or 5 men around you, and I shook your hand, and I told you I was Brother Walker, and you told me who you was, and we passed a couple words, and then 3 or 4 big men with you just pushed you on. He said, I wasn't your critic, and I wasn't for you. He said, I just didn't understand. He said it went on that way for a few years, and after a while, said, a man told me to come listen to some tapes about 3 years ago. He said, the man played the tapes, and when he did, he said, I heard talk, said, this man believed that you was a prophet. Well, said I told the man, I don't know about those things. Might be for all I know. So said then, another man moved into our town, had a meeting, and I met him, and he said, I'm God's prophet for this day. He said, how many of you guys are there anyhow? Said, I hear where a man down here is listening to tape, said William Branham back in the East was a prophet of the day and things like that. He said, this man, I ain't going to call his name because it don't sound right here, you see. And he said, I know William Branham. Said, but he's all false in his doctrine. Said he isn't Pentecostal, he doesn't believe in initial evidence. And said, another thing, he says he's major and minor prophets. There is no such a thing. Said, you're a prophet or not a prophet, and that's all. He said, well, mister, I didn't argue with you about it. I just said I heard this man say that this man, William Branham, this man claimed that he was a prophet. So I just wondered how many there was. He said, but I want you to know this, I'm the prophet of this age. He said, well, you are. Said, the Lord bless you and be with you. He went on, never paid any attention to it, and said, he started on, amongst his brethren, a series of 3 or 4 meetings. And he went down to the post office and said, don't change my mail, leave it here till I come back about 4 or 5 days later. All right, they said. They put a ticket up there not to change it. He went down and seen his daughter, and on the road out, he stopped at a church, and he had that night's meeting, and next morning he said he just happened to think, go get general delivery. And when he did, one letter had creeped through the post office and got to his daughter. His daughter sent their general delivery, and he opened it up, and it said it was the man, Mr. Hildebrand, which is a friend of mine that had been the man paying the tapes. Said, Mr. Hildebrand had a word from Roy Borders, and that's one of the managers, you know, that I was going to hold a meeting back here from the 28th to the 1st, come back and see for himself. He said, now looky here. Them guys trying to pull me in something like that, see? And he just slipped the letter over in the wastebasket and went on, see? Like that. Went on in, held that meeting that night, and the next morning, then he started holding his heart to crying right there in the room. He said, Mr. Branham, I realize I got to stand before God. He said, I don't know whether I sleep or what happened. He said, I dreamed, I'm going to say I was asleep, and I dreamed. Said, I thought my son in the market stuck his hand in a sack. And said, when it is a sack of apples, and they all turned over. Said, when I went to pick them up, there's all green apples with one bite taken out of them. So I was picking them up, put them back in the sack. Said, some of them rolled out and rolled down, so I went to try to get them on the grass, and said they rolled under one of these chain lock fences, and there's a big super highway running there. I looked back east, and he said the chain was hooked against a big rock back in the east. Now I went back there, I thought I'd let this chain down, then go over and get the apples for the man. So I started to let the chain down, so the voice shook the whole earth. Said the earth shook from under my feet. And so after it quit shaking, I heard a voice that said, Brother Branham, it's your voice. Said, I know there's something said that's it. So it said, I'll ride this trail once more. And so I started looking up the rock like this, looked on into past the clouds, and way up there, standing on a rock that reached from the east to the west in a pointed shape like that, like a pyramid. Run back here to the east, and said there he was standing there on a horse that I'd never seen anything like it in my life. Great white horse, white mane hanging down, and it said he was dressed like an Indian chief with all the things the Indians use. It said he had a breastplate, and bangles on the arms, and all down around like that. It said you had your hands up like that. It said that horse standing there like a military horse with a prance like this, walking. He's standing still. And said you pulled on the reins, went riding off towards the west. Said I looked down there, there's a whole lot of scientists And the next morning, that was Saturday, on the next morning I preached on scientists, being of the devil, and said scientists is ever pouring things in tubes and mixing it. Said you stop the horse, raised up your hands again and screamed, I'll ride this trail once more. And said the whole earth shook. Then people shook, said, looked up and looked one another like that, looked up to you. They just shrugged their shoulders and went on with their scientific research. And said you started going on towards the west. And when it did, said I seen this man that called himself a prophet, you know it, said he come up on a horse that was mixed with white and black together. And said he got up behind this great big horse, said it was, say, way up above the clouds, and the road wasn't over about that wide. And said that horse just starts to the wind blowing, the feathers and everything on your garb, and said then the horse mane and tail going, great master, big white horse walking right line, and said this guy run up behind you, come from towards Canada, and the man lives in Canada. And said, come back, and said he took his little horse trying to knock your big horse off, turned him around, make his hips hit against the, said never moved the big horse, he just kept walking. Said then all of a sudden, said you turned around, said that'd be the third time you'd spoke, but the second time you said I'll ride. And said you didn't speak like you did. You commanded. Said you turned around and called the man by name and said, get off of here. You know that no man can ride this road here without God be ordained him to do it. Get off of here. And said the man turned around and said the man has wrote me letters and said across his horse's hips, that black and gray and mixed up together, said across his horse's hips was wrote his name signature just exactly like it's on his letter. And he rode off towards the north. Said then you went on down, that big horse turned around way as far west as you could. Said you stood and raised your hands up like that, and then he started crying. Said, Brother Branham, see that horse down there, all that war bonnet and everything like that? And said that breastplate and everything shining. Said you held your hands up a little while, and said you looked down again, picked up the reins, and said, I'll ride this trail just once more. Said the whole earth shook back and forth like that. And said there was no more life left in me. I just fell down the side of the rock and I woke up. Said, what does it mean, sir? I said, I don't know.